Not only did this Australian abattoir worker stab her lover John Charles Thomas Price with a butcher knife at least 37 times on February 29, 2000, she then chopped him up, cooked him, and prepared to serve him to his own children. But long before this grisly killing, the disturbing story of Catherine Mary Knight was marked by violence and sexual abuse that hinted at the bloodshed to come. The beginning of Catherine Knight and John Price's relationship was without complications. He had 2 older children who lived with him and seemed to like Knight, and he made enough money as a minor to keep her comfortable. They moved in together in 1995 and things were going smoothly. However, when she suggested they marry and he declined, she turned violent. Knight framed Price for stealing things from his company and got him fired. Though he initially kicked her out, a few months later they started seeing each other again. However, this time, he refused to let her move back in. According to their friends and neighbors, Knight's violence then began to escalate. In February of 2000, an argument between John Charles Thomas Price and Catherine Knight culminated with her attempting to stab him in the chest. He took out a restraining order against her in an attempt to keep his children safe. Toward the end of the month, Price let on that he was concerned for his safety and told his co-workers that if he ever went missing, it was because Knight killed him.
Ruth Wilson was just 16 when she set off for Box Hill from Dorking train station in a taxi. The teenager was dropped off in a lay-by at the Surrey Beauty Spot at around 4:30 p.m. that day and was never seen again. That was the best part of 3 decades ago, and there has been little to no trace of the Ashcombe School student in the 28 years since. This astonishing case has left police officers baffled as to what really happened to Ruth.
On November 9, 1971, John List shot and killed his wife, Helen, his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, his 15-year-old son, John, his 13-year-old son, Frederick, and his mother, Alma, aged 85. They were shot methodically, one by one. Helen was first. List saw the children off to school and then shot her in the kitchen as she sipped her usual morning coffee. Then, he went up to the 3rd floor and murdered his mother in her bed. He shot Patricia and his youngest son, Frederick, when they returned home from school. Then, he made himself a sandwich, closed out his bank accounts, and cheered for his other son, John, at his high school soccer game. He gave him a ride home and then shot him in the chest. With his entire family dead, John List then set out to escape justice for his grisly crimes. John List laid the bodies of his family members on top of sleeping bags in the ballroom and then composed a note to his pastor, who he felt would understand his actions. He feared his family, confronted with a world full of evil and poverty, would turn from God. Killing them was the only way to secure their spot in heaven.
There was a young guy, I believe 19 or 20 years old, who worked the overnight shift at a local grocery store in my hometown. He ended up coming in with a gun and shooting most of his co-workers one night. It turns out he was pretty disturbed. He had an obsession with a certain cartoon and made online videos with some pretty violent details, had a whole online persona, and had been planning the shooting for a while. I worked an overnight front desk shift at a hotel just down the road from the store and watched the news coverage the last couple hours of my shift. I remember driving past the store going home at around 7 a.m. and the place was packed with police cars. It was just a very eerie and sad feeling, and I didn't even know any of the victims personally. Just that general sense of dread and heartbreak for their families. It's a fairly small town. Not much crime ever happens, let alone something of that nature. It definitely caused a lot of pain and shook the whole community.
My mom's murder in Ohio back in the 70s. Nothing like that ever happened in our town. A 15-year-old boy in our neighborhood stabbed her to death. His sister was one of my best friends. She came over for sleepovers and was like my second family. The paramedics stood over her naked body as she bled out. The cops knew he did it, but they didn't get around to arresting him until the next day. They didn't read him his rights, and they botched the investigation. The sightseer started driving by that day and didn't stop for a long time. He only had to serve time until he was 18. He tried to escape a few days before his release. He got extra time and served until he was 21. The boys' family wasted no time putting the blame on my mom. They claimed the two of them were having an affair and that it was demonic-fueled. Gratefully, there was very little news reported, even though there were plenty of news people there. I was able to keep the news reporting to a minimum. I was 18 at the time, and I threatened to sue.